I use the Galaxy S20 Ultra as my primary phone with my Mint Mobile SIM, which apparently can get 5G, so it's not insanely stupid to buy a expensive phone like this with 5G and put my Mint card in it, but it was my daily driver. You can ask Nick and Randy from the Tailosive Tech podcast. Yes, I turned green for all of my friends and family, which came with all of the shame. And there's a lot of good things I have to say about the Ultra, but ultimately, if you need to take away anything from this video, is don't buy it, okay? I'm not gonna recommend this phone, and here's why. Let's begin. Before we go full-on Apple sheep and dive right into the negatives, let me tell you what I like about this phone, which is primarily when it comes to the hardware. From a functional standpoint, this is darn near perfect. I love 120 Hz, so if you instantly want me to fall in love with a phone very, very quickly, having a 120 Hz display is a great way to do that. As soon as I took this thing out of the box, it was not on by default, which was kind of annoying, so I immediately switched it on, and yeah, it hurts your battery life, I get that, and you could probably get a lot longer with 60 Hz, but the battery on this thing is 5,000 milliamp hours, and that's fine. It's not the insane battery life I'm used to with my 11 Pro Max, but my 11 Pro Max doesn't have 120 Hz, so obviously it lasts a lot longer, and 120 Hz with the Ultra still lasts me all day just fine. It wasn't like I was having to charge it very regularly. I was usually ending the day around 30 to 20%, and typically with the 11 Pro Max, I can end the day with 40 to 50%. So still lasts me through the day. I still have to charge it just like any phone within a 24-hour period. That's typically how you're using things, but if you were on a long trip or something and you were going to be away from a charger for a long time, yeah, you have that option, just turn it off, and 60 Hz isn't as cool, but if you want to preserve battery life, you can do that. I appreciate a ton of the changes Samsung made with this phone. It's also kind of funny looking back on how many things Samsung has introduced, and a lot of people got really hyped for, and then we all just forgot about it, and Samsung even forgot about it, so they got rid of it. For one, the variable aperture on the camera, that used to be like the primary thing everyone was excited for with the Galaxy S9. Yeah, it's gone now because they realized it wasn't really making that big a difference. Thankfully, after years of complaining, they've also removed the Bixby button, which I've always hated. From the get-go, I was like, this is stupid, this is gimmicky, and it makes me think that Bixby might one day become one of those features that Samsung just ends up axing because not enough people are using it. So without a Bixby button, and most people are going to be rerouting the hold the power button to the Google Assistant, to me it's totally believable that Samsung might just axe it altogether in the future. But currently, no button is nice. While the button layout on this is not ideal for me because I like being able to take screenshots very easily on my iPhone by just pressing the volume and power button on the same time, and you can do that with this, but the power and down volume are just far enough away from each other that it's pretty hard to press both at the same time. Though I should mention Samsung's One UI gives you a ton of screenshotting options and cropping and editing after the fact. But yeah, screenshots feel a little bit more inconvenient because I have to hold the phone like this. I know there's some gestures you can do. There's literally like billions of features and options on this phone, but let me save that for later. I also really appreciate Samsung not curving the display as much. I know they want to be futuristic and cool, but I have always kind of despised it from the beginning. At first I thought it was kind of cool, it was kind of futuristic, but as I used it on more and more phones, I realized, you know what, I'm setting off the display a lot, and just from a comfort standpoint, whenever they make the display bleed over the sides like that, they have to make the edges of the phone a lot sharper than I'm used to with iPhones. So switching to the S20 Ultra, it feels a lot more rounded out on the sides, much more comfortable to hold. It's still a somewhat light phone despite it having a near 7-inch display, and this display is gorgeous. It gets insanely bright, the colors are accurate, you get a whole lot of detail out of it. The speakers on the S20 Ultra are amazing, no complaints there. Headphone jack is gone after all those ingenious commercials Samsung made about it, and I'm just gonna linger on this topic for a little bit longer, even though most people don't care about it. They're just like, yeah, I mean, that's to be expected, but I totally predicted this. If you go back and watch my videos over the years, I said multiple times throughout my videos, Samsung is going to remove the jack, and they're not waiting for Bluetooth technology to have some type of revolutionary breakthrough. They're just waiting for all of the complaining to be over with so that when Samsung removes it, they don't receive any criticism, which is why Apple's original statement of saying, you know, we have courage for removing the jack, that was accurate because they knew that's where the market was going and they were going to get a lot of backlash for trying to adopt those new standards, and that by the time the rest of the market moved on, there would be no backlash. So I don't think the wireless headphone industry has changed insanely since the iPhone 7 came out. I mean, we had AirPods back then, we have AirPods now, they've gotten a little bit better, but it's not like like Samsung was waiting for the prime time. We want to wait till wireless technology has been figured out and implemented properly. It was like, it's basically the same as it is now. We may have gotten a little better latency, but there were a lot of you guys saying that Samsung won't remove the jack until they can include wireless headphones with the purchase. They don't. They don't even include an adapter, I think, with the Ultra. So Apple doesn't include an adapter either, but they did 2 years of iPhones where they included adapters. So they kind of gave people a window to adjust and then stopped after that. I'm not saying I want the headphone jack back. I'm glad it's gone. I'm just saying, Samsung, you know, think twice before making fun of people, because we knew you were going to do this all along. So yeah, between iris scanning, variable aperture, the headphone jack, and the Bixby button, Samsung can't make up their mind on a lot of things. I know Apple removed some stuff too, but it seems like a lot of things Samsung is very, very specific about, they will eventually change their mind on. So who knows? They could change their mind on a lot of things with this. But a lot of people have often asked me, like, well, Drew, if you think the hardware on the S20 Ultra is so good, would you use an S20 Ultra if it ran iOS? And that's where I stop ya, and we can get into some of the reasons. I'm not a huge fan of this phone, even though I like a lot of it. It's not something I would switch to, even if it somehow ran iOS, because I'm not a fan of the biometrics. I don't think this has changed since the last Galaxy S phone I reviewed, but I would much rather have one really, really good biometric like Face ID instead of 2 okay biometrics. That's how I see the face unlock on the S20 Ultra and the in-display fingerprint reader. Yeah, I get for some of you fingerprint readers are fine, but I still find it a little bit weird that when the display is off, you have to kind of muscle memory remember where the fingerprint reader is. After a week of using it, there were still a lot of times I would put down my finger and it would say no match, didn't quite get you there. And also I have psoriasis, so my fingerprints are not super reliable. And I just love the flexibility with an iPhone of being able to raise to wake and having it unlock, or if it's sitting on your desk, you can just tap the display anywhere. You don't have to tap it in a specific way with a specific fingerprint. You just tap it anywhere on the display and it unlocks and you're good to go. With this, it's like, okay, if you want to unlock with the fingerprint reader, you have to tap it with this finger this way. You know, it can't be a quick little tap. You have to really have to hold it there and at a specific place. So I think it would help in the future if Samsung made the fingerprint reader of the display take up like the whole bottom half, or at least just a larger portion than it currently does. And again, I'm not trying to say the biometrics suck on this. They get the job done. I even have face unlock turned on just for those instances where fingerprint readers don't work really reliably. But again, it's kind of a gamble every time I turn on the phone. It's like, will it get my finger or will it get my face? I want it to get one or the other, but face unlock is of course not super secure. It's just using the camera. It's not using any 3D dot projectors and stuff like that. So 2 okay biometrics, they're fine. Not as good as just one really, really solid one. So personal preference, I guess, but that's one reason I don't think I would switch to this even if it ran iOS. But you'll notice a lot of the things I talked about liking with the S20 Ultra aren't really unique to the Ultra. So what warrants, you know, the $1,400 starting price, and after taxes and everything, that gets well into the $1,500 starting price. What do you get out of this Ultra that you cannot get out of the S20 and S20 Plus, which are $200 to $400 cheaper? That's quite a bit. Well, most of it comes from the screen size, the battery, and the cameras. And this is where I think Samsung did not change. You know, they changed their mind on a lot of things with this phone. This is something that is classic Samsung, which is it looks really good on paper. We need to get it out to the market, so let's not test it and experiment with it very much, and let's just throw it out in the market. I have no idea how Samsung can get away with making a camera with issues as big as this one, and everyone's just kind of fine with it, you know? So many people on YouTube freaked out about Beautygate on the iPhone because you would take a picture and it would smoothen out your face a little bit to try to combat dynamic range. Everyone flipped out over that. It was in all the news articles, and YouTubers were making countless videos on the subject, and yet this thing, when I tried to record an 8K video, which was really cool, as you guys remember, I was really excited for that. There were leaks about it, and Samsung announced it would have 8K video. I think 8K is kind of overkill, but the fact that I've never shot anything in 8K before, I was like, that's awesome. I can't wait to record one. I recorded a vlog for my Tailosive Talks channel, and I was not even holding the phone for the majority of the vlog. 80% of this video, I just had it on a tripod, and I sat in my chair, and I just talked to the camera. I wasn't holding things up closer to it, and the autofocus was downright unusable. Now, with jump cuts, the blurry parts of that vlog would take 30 seconds for the camera to realize, oh wait, I don't think I'm in focus. I should start focusing on him again. So if you remove the jump cuts, that was like a good 40 seconds. So when you're recording long videos in 8K, it will just even on static shots, even when the camera's not moving, even when the subject isn't moving, it will blur out of focus for half a minute, and this is on the latest software update. I know they're saying like, we'll fix these in future updates, but Samsung's not really known for being super reliable with that, and this is a $1,400 purchase, which I get it, you know, companies have bugs and they handle them in different ways, but can we just acknowledge that if this thing happened with an iPhone, YouTubers would be all over it and complaining about it nonstop? I paid $1,000 for a phone and this is the experience I get, this is crazy. You would get serious autofocus gate videos, everyone freaking out that Apple would charge this much for a phone and leave bugs this major in the software, and yet with this one, we're like, yeah, you know, it happens. That kind of sucks. Or, well, it's at 8K, so if it's the first phone to do it, it's okay if it's not great at it. It's okay if it sucks because no one else has tried to do it before. But these are excuses we don't give Apple, and I'm not saying that we should give more excuses to Apple. I'm just saying, if you're going to be hard on Apple, you got to be hard on Samsung too, because they're charging more than the most expensive iPhone, and this is the standard configuration. And if you're promising that you can shoot something at 8K, then focusing the camera should be ironed out a little bit before shipping it out, especially at this price point. So the other big advantage you have is the 100x space zoom, which is 90% marketing jargon. This one feels a little bit over the top for me because they're cheating in several ways with this 100x thing, because for one, they're counting 100x from the ultra wide, which iPhones don't really do that. In that case, would you call the telephoto lens on the iPhone a 4x, or would you call it a 2x? Because you're zooming in twice from the main lens, even though it's 4 times from the ultra wide. So they're cheating in that way a little bit. And also, when has any smartphone ever, I can't recall this ever happening, but when has any smartphone camera counted a digital zoom as like the actual naming of the lens? The 100x is like majority of the time just cropping in. We've never considered cropping actual like capabilities of a lens before. For the same reason, I don't say my iPhone has a 10x zoom, even though if we count digital, it technically does, but digital zooming is not really zooming. Digital zooming is just cropping in. You can do that in post. If I crop in on my face during this video, is that the camera zooming in? No, it's just an effect. So the fact that you can crop in real time while taking pictures on this thing, 100x, I mean, now, that's not to say that the telephoto is not good. You know, I acknowledge that this camera has a much better zoom than a lot of other smartphones out there. In fact, probably the best if you compared it to other flagships. That's really, really impressive and all. It's just, it's getting to the point where we're reaching the law of diminishing returns, where, you know, for the longest time, a few smartphone cameras were adopting telephoto lenses. So it was like, cool, we can punch in and get a little bit closer to the subject. And then for a couple years, we had the ultra-wide trend, and now companies are like, okay, let's move into ultra-wides because now you can zoom in, but also you can zoom out. So we got that trend done. We got the ultra wide part. Now we're going back to, okay, let's do zoom, but really far zoom. Let's go even further than before, which I've noticed in my daily life. Like having a telephoto lens on a phone is helpful, especially if you like taking pictures or videos. Having the option to zoom in, that's great, but there's only so many scenarios where you need to zoom in this far that it actually matters, to the point that I don't think you should spend an extra $200 or an extra $400 just so that you're cropped in photos, because a lot of this is digital cropping anyway. That's going to warrant the extra price point, you know? Worth is subjective, I get that. So maybe if you're out there just saying, you know, I've always wanted 100x on a smartphone camera, I guess it may be worth it for you. I just don't even see like pro users, even people who are really techie and really into smartphones, finding situations where they need to zoom in that far. Like I had to specifically find locations and go to places to test this camera out. So what I'm trying to say is, in my everyday life, I can come up with a few situations where it's handy to punch in 2x, 5x, maybe even 10x if something's decently far away. But once you start getting into 50x, 100x, it's like, okay, I can't even find anything that this is useful for. And the 100x photos are terrible. They don't look good. You can tell very quickly after taking the photo that the preview has to be smoothened out by Samsung software really, really heavily to get it to not look super grainy. So I would not recommend taking any photo or video at 100x with this phone, just for the sake of, if you care about photos, which if you're buying this phone, I assume you do, don't take things that zoomed in. It looks awful. Yeah, 30x, fine, but again, the number of situations I was in where I was like, 30x, that's how far in I need to zoom, is very, very far and few between. There's very little times I found that useful. But outside of the zoom, we also have the 108 megapixel camera sensor, which I guess Samsung missed the memo about megapixels not being everything, and that's why I think, again, this is an example of it looks good on paper because 108 megapixels, that's really high, right? That's way higher than the competition, but that doesn't mean it's good, and there's a lot of software issues and I think just general things that would have easily been caught if someone actually tested this thing out for a little while. But yeah, similar to what other reviewers have brought up with the 108 megapixel sensor, you'll take a photo and like you can't get the whole subject in focus. The field of focus is so narrow that anytime you take a picture, it's like right here is in focus and then everything else is blurry. So it really only matters when you're taking like sweeping landscape shots. But the detail is good. You know, you can pinch in a lot and there's a whole lot of sharpness to it, but it takes up an insane amount of storage, and the majority of places you're posting anything you took on a smartphone are going to be compressed. So when you compare it to a decent smartphone camera with a 12 megapixel sensor at, you know, average viewing distance, it really doesn't make that big a difference. When you zoom in and pinch and get really close up, it's like, okay, yeah, there's a little bit more detail there, but it's not the insane upgrade that 108 megapixels sounds like. It comes with its own set of disadvantages in low light performance, and I don't have the Galaxy S20 or S20 Plus on me, but I've seen those reviews, and it's crazy to me that those cheaper models, because they don't have the 108 megapixel sensor, their performance is actually better in some instances. They're able to pull out more detail and they're able to get more things in focus, less of that, you know, narrow field to the point that you can't even really get much in focus, and they're better in low light. It's like, why is this on the Ultra? This should be on some experimental prototype. It kind of reminds me of the time when Apple started implementing slow-mo video in iPhones. It was like, whoa, you can take these shots and they're at really high frame rates so you can slow them down. That's super cool. So then like the following year, Samsung released slow-mo at 960 frames a second. So on paper, that looks amazing because you're like, whoa, that's almost 1,000 frames a second. That's insane. But then you find out that that's so incredibly slow. They can only do it for like a quarter of a second, and you have to make a specific camera mode that like only activates 960 FPS when an object flies through a certain part of the preview, and then they activate super slow mode. And you saw a couple of YouTubers talk about it, right? You saw some YouTube channels that were like, whoa, look at this rain at 960 FPS, or look at this snow, look at me kicking these rocks, it's so incredibly slow motion. And now here we are, 2020, no one's using it. That's how I feel like the 100x space zoom and the 108 megapixel camera sensor, that's my guess how that's going to go. It's like we talk about it now, it sounds really cool on paper, we get a few camera tests out of it, and then a few years later it's like, oh yeah, that was a thing, wasn't it? Like, I can't think of anyone in the past year that's come up with like functional uses for the 960 frames a second mode. I don't even know if they still have that, do they? I don't know. But my point is, Samsung went all out on specs and not hard enough on actually using the device to figure out, oh, is this actually good? Does this actually result in a better experience? And if they did that, they would have realized that, oh, the more expensive S20 Ultra actually can perform worse than the cheaper S20 and S20 Plus in many circumstances, many of which I think are important. So when it comes to the software and switching back to Android for another week, you know, a lot of my issues with Samsung have not changed. The fact that there are 2 versions of everything, and anytime I boot up a Samsung phone, I feel like I'm constantly fixing it, you know, because it's asking me, do you want to put your contacts in the Samsung app or the Google app, or do you want to open the Samsung browser or Google Chrome, or do you want to open the Samsung gallery or the Google gallery? Even the digital assistants, like the software constantly feels like it's fighting over itself, and I don't care which one you have to go to. Either go in on Google or go in on Samsung. I don't like the phone software bickering over itself. And there's so many apps I use regularly that are so much worse on the Google Play Store than they are on iOS. Discord specifically, which I use a ton. And the fact that you can't like swipe across the screen to access different channels, and you have to swipe from the very far side in order to activate that. Just the swiping and gestures and stuff feel a little bit more clunky. But again, there's some really solid hardware here, but none of it I think is exclusive to the Ultra. My favorite favorite parts about this phone you can buy with the S20 and the S20 Plus, and I would heavily recommend those if you're looking for top tier hardware with Android on it. Those are amazing. You know, the battery life may be not so good, but they still have the 120 hertz and they can still last you through the day. They still have great cameras. For the record, I did do a vlog with this at 4K at 60 and it did fantastic. That was the second vlog on the Talks channel that I shot with this. It's called I'm an Idiot. Feel free to check it out. And that one was shot on this and it looked great. The audio was wonderful. The image was fine. The frame rate was very buttery and consistent and I had a good time using it. It worked fine. But you can get that on the S20 and S20 Plus as well. So the bizarre thing about the S20 Ultra, and this is like over a year since my Galaxy S10 video, they still don't let you do 4K at 60 on the ultra wide lens. In fact, if anything, I don't think they changed anything about the ultra wide lens this year. It's exactly the same. They still limit certain video recording options, and I have a friend with a Galaxy S10 5G, and we compared ultra wide shots and held them side by side, and we barely noticed a difference. Same with his zoom. We both did like telephoto zooms, and mine was like a little bit clearer, but again, nothing I would put a $200 to $400 price tag on. Everything is just getting so incremental. I do think we've kind of peaked with smartphone upgrades now to the point that no, you should not be spending this much money on a device like this. And I don't even think it's worth it for the screen, to be honest, because S20 Plus is 6.7 inches. That's still a really huge display. And this one is kind of just a tiny bit too tall. There's been a handful of situations where I just can't reach the top, and having to activate one-handed mode a lot can get a little cumbersome. And I like big displays, but I'm not a fan of this aspect ratio of getting taller and taller and taller. I thought the iPhone aspect ratio was about as tall as I'm comfortable with. You don't need to go much taller than that. So yeah, I don't think the S20 lineup sucks. In fact, I think most of it's pretty good. And I don't think I need to go out and buy an S20 and S20 Plus to tell you that I think that one is probably a lot better for the money. But yeah, don't go with the Ultra. Save a couple $100. Get a phone that's going to take better pictures, perform better in low light in some instances. You still get the 120 hertz. You don't have this awkwardly large display or this awkwardly large camera bump, you know. I do have small gripes with the design, but nothing huge. It's all kind of nitpicky. Like the back of these phones are very glossy. They're huge fingerprint magnets. This camera module is enormous. Like when the first time I saw the iPhone 11 camera module, I thought it looked stupid, but then once Apple actually unveiled it, it looked way more simple and way more classy than the concepts did. And I'm like, okay, this thing's pretty thin. It kind of blends in. I get it. But this is like, my God, it sticks out a ton. So there's a ton of rocking on desks. It's very, very chunk. It takes up a huge portion of the back. And I wish they wouldn't make the microphone holes on these things look like the same holes of the SIM card tray, because people, when they're swapping out SIMs, are going to think, oh, I got to pop in the ejector right there. I've seen people do that and it scares the crap out of me. I'm like, don't stick a pin in there. I like that Apple kind of makes the speaker and microphone holes separate from the SIM card tray. So those are just my little nitpicky complaints at the end. But overall, very impressive hardware, but nothing about the Ultra is worth it to very many people in my mind, unless you really, really care. Just barely a little bit better zooming, a little bit more sharper photos with a 108 megapixel sensor. Don't get this one. And also, there's a rattle when you shake this phone. You can hear the cameras inside rattling back and forth. It's just not a good sound to hear on a $1,500 phone. But anyway, thank you guys for watching this insanely long Apple Sheep rant. I hope Samsung can learn from their lessons when it comes to software and understanding that just specs on paper don't mean better. And if you're in the market for an Android and you're looking for a flagship, I would not critique you or shame anybody who's interested in the S20 or S20 Plus. Just do not get the Ultra. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.